Let's bring in former Florida Congressman Lieutenant Colonel Allen West. Colonel, he's tweeting this morning, but does not even mention Charlottesville. Is that a mistake?
Yeah, I think that you have to continue to follow up on this and talk about how you're going to have corrective actions. It's one of the things, my condolences go out to that young 32-year-old young lady who lost her life there. And we have to come out and start talking about how do we heal this country. There was a great Wall Street Journal opinion editorial piece that talked about the identity politics that we see here in the United States of America. We got to get this right. We know that we just recently had the shooting of Congressman Steve Scalise. And so there's plenty of blame to go around on both sides with the violence that we see happening. And we need to have the leadership, the voice of a president that can get this to calm down.
Lieutenant Colonel, and I'll point out that the Journal does call out President Trump on this, that they write, as so often with Mr. Trump, his original statement missed an opportunity to speak like a unifying political leader. But they go on to talk about leaders on the other side of the aisle of different political ideologies. These are individuals who won't even utter the words, "all lives matter." And to that point, in terms of the lack of unification, following that deadly violence, Democrats were slamming the president, including California Congresswoman Maxine Waters. She tweeted this: "Trump has made it clear with Bannon and Gorka in the White House and the Klan in the streets, it is now the white supremacist house." What do you make of that?
Well, Maxine Waters is looking for whatever she can say that is part of sensationalism that is out there. But where was her voice when we had that shooting of Representative Steve Scalise? Where was the voice when we had Black Lives Matter that was out there talking about pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon? What do we want? Dead cops. When do we want them? Now. Or even the violence that we see from this group called Antifa. We know that we had cars that were being set afire on the inauguration day. We also look at what happened out there in her home state of California at University of California, Berkeley. So again, we don't need to have this partisan divide. We need to talk about how both sides need to calm down. You know, nobody wants to see white nationalism or Ku Klux Klan or what have you. But I don't recall Maxine Waters saying a word when Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, and Hillary Clinton gave such glowing, reviews at the memorial of Robert Byrd, and we know his background.
Lieutenant Colonel, I think, we can relitigate all of the things of the past, but right now we had an issue with Charlottesville. It was white supremacists. It was neo-Nazis. And so I don't necessarily think that it's appropriate right now to go back and talk about all of the other things that we're against. This just happened, and I think the president needs to address it. On top of which, in his statement last night from the White House, he says it's time for us to come together, and he talked about needing unifying, a country that needs unifying. And then he goes out and starts going obstructionist Democrats today. Do you think it seems like a contradiction for him to be out there talking the morning after saying it's time for us to come together and go out just like that right out of the gate without even addressing Charlottesville?
Well, first of all, again, I think that the president is focusing more on a politicized agenda, and he does need to focus on the healing of this country. But once again, I will say this: we can't just continue to talk about putting a Band-Aid on a sucking chest wound. I think leadership is about looking back and saying, how do we get to this point? And how do we bring everyone to the table to understand that all of this violence is unnecessary? And I don't think going back and talking about the shooting of Representative Steve Scalise, former colleague of mine, is something that we should disavow. This is part of all of this that has brought us to this point that sadly culminated with the death of a 32-year-old young lady yesterday. So we need to talk about this. We need to bridge this divide.
Yeah, Lieutenant Colonel, I think you're bringing up a great point that, it's Kevin Kelly here, by the way, I think you're bringing up a great point that this actually has to do with violence. And anytime you take violence to impose your will or thoughts or ideals on a nonviolent person, I think that goes against what this country was founded on. And we're trying, I mean, this was solely founded on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, should the focus be on education as well as ideals that this country was founded on, because this violence is just escalating? So should the president focus on that as well and saying, listen, you can't, violence is not the answer here, and stay on top of that message over and over and over again, because it's only getting worse at every protest we see from here on out?
Well, it's not just the president. It's all the elected leaders here in the United States of America, the elected officials. It can't be to the point where if you disagree with someone on their principles or values or their agenda or their politics, all of a sudden you have to be a racist or you have to be a sexist, you're an Islamophobe, you're a homophobe, and all of these things. And I think that's where we have to calm down, and we have to be able to have this intellectual and civil discourse. You know, when we talk about diversity being strength, we need to make sure that all viewpoints are accepted, and we can learn from each other. We can have those discussions. But to immediately try to shut people down, to immediately go to the course of action of violence, that's not how this is supposed to happen. And I think it's important that we talk about some of these past things that have occurred since November of last year that have brought us again to this point, which I think is unacceptable.